thank you so much for coming to this presentation. I'm just going to take you through a little preamble bit to tell you what I'm going to be doing. And I'm going to start that off with a question. How do we get from this to this? And what I'm getting at here is it's clearly about degrees of insight, about levels of insight, levels of understanding of a situation. And I'm using it as an analogy for website building. And specifically, I'm using it as an analogy for the process of working with a client to achieve a very articulate sense of understanding of what it is that they want. And also, an analogy for the understanding that the client themselves go through as they go from, I think I want a website, to it's launched and it's great. So the analogy is pointing to levels of details, levels of articulation, which this shape transition, I think, sums up quite nicely. So the process, ideally, would be smooth, but right off the bat, there are shifts. Of course there are shifts because we're human. And this wavy line is a kind of a symbol I often use to refer to mindsets. The fact that we're not machines, we don't think in straight lines, we think in bumpy kind of shapes. And this is what I'm imagining would be a kind of an ideal harmonic process of interaction between site builders and clients. And site builder, I mean an organization or individual. Client is someone that wants a website. And it would be ideal if, as people shift, the other can follow. Kind of like partner dancing in a way. And my observation from having done a few websites and worked with clients and so on, is that with Drupal, specifically, that's what we're talking about here, there's a point where it kind of starts to diverge. And the client is still thinking in terms of what they thought they were doing. But at the other side, something goes different. And I think, this is my hypothesis, it gets to the point where we have to start implementing. We start thinking about implementing. So what that means is that the concerns that people have as they collaborate together are more or less harmonious until the point of implementation. And specifically around the idea of, well, your website consists of a bunch of pages. Let's start thinking about building those pages out. And then we end up getting into the weeds of making Drupal produce pages. And that takes us away from the mindset of the client. That's my hypothesis, and that's what I'm going to run with today. And what that gets down to, since we're talking about web pages, fundamentally that means information architecture. So the point of my hypothesis is that I believe Drupal doesn't have a systematic way to define and maintain and build and evolve information architecture. It's got a number of ways that you can arrive at it eventually, but it's not systematic. And I believe that causes some problems in terms of the process. I would like it to be like this, where web pages come out of some kind of natural process that clients as human beings can understand, and that the site builder, whoever they may be, can stay in tune with them and get things done at the same time. That's what I'd like. So I'm going to propose a kind of a way of looking at that problem. Now, my background is originally fine arts, but I have been doing software development for decades. And currently I run a company called the UserAdvocate Group, and we provide usability R&D services to our clients, which means that there are times when I'm doing user testing type things or analysis of usability and so on, and there are times when I'm over here building stuff to make it happen. And I try to keep those two things balanced because I think there's insights I get from both, and I'm really interested in that space in between those two extremes. So I refer to myself as a user interface systems architect. So as I said, it's looking at it from two simultaneous points of view, technical and user-oriented. And most recently, I put up this very informal kind of survey, more a discussion on LinkedIn, and asked the question of people there. And I got some responses back, and this was kind of a last-minute thing, really, a couple of weeks ago. I got some nice responses, and enough to give me some further insights into this kind of problem. So what I did in my question when I posted this was I listed all the ways that I know of that you can build pages in Drupal. And I said, can you comment on those? And I had this catch-all here. If there's something else I don't know about, let me know. And so the results of this discussion were, it depends. And my interpretation of that was, it depends on circumstances, whatever they may be. And I think, to a degree, on some kind of personal preference for the developers, people involved in site builders. And by the way, I'm saying developers, and I'm saying site builders. They're not always the same thing. But I posted it on the developer group because of one of those items in there was hook menu implementations, and a lot of site builders don't go there. I wanted the wider set, so that's why I started off there. So this is what I would like the process to be dependent on. I would like it to be factoring in the usage context of those pages, because that's the usability brain kicking in. And I would like that to be very much foremost in the minds of people as they get into site building and implementation. So I want to speak a bit about usage context. What is it? Well, here are examples of usage context. The reason I use this symbol, the traffic cone, the orange traffic cone, is because it's all about usage context. The traffic cone has absolutely no function whatsoever outside of a usage context. I believe the same thing is true of software, but we don't really think of it like that because we think the software kind of has functional things all by itself. You turn it on, it runs, great. It spits things out, great. But when it gets down to it, at the end of the day, it's about usage context. That's really the measure of whether it's working or not. So the traffic cone allows me to focus on that and pay attention to it. Here's an example. My hand hurts watching that. So behind the placement of these things is some kind of messaging, and it's saying, watch out. Watch out for the usage context. Pay attention to the usage context. So at a kind of a meta level, that's what it's saying. That's what's going on there. So I want to consider the usage context of a website, and that means ultimately considering the business intent of the website. I'm going to define the terms again. What does business intent mean? Let's break it down. Business, by business, what I mean is a very broad definition, the activity around things that matter to the organization, the individual that's got this business, and the people they're trying to reach. Intent, a standard kind of definition, is having the attention sharply focused on something. So I think the business intent is about sharply focusing on getting things done with the people you're trying to reach. That fundamentally is what you're trying to do with a website. Get things done with the people you're trying to reach. Very, very broad definition, but why not start from the outside? Specifically, I think that involves interaction between the site owner, the client, and the site visitors or the users. And that's why the website exists. Since I'm a usability person, people might say, do you mean human-computer interaction? I'm about to get on a soapbox now because I absolutely despise that term. Despise the term because if you think about what it means, interaction, reciprocal action, effect, or influence. Reciprocal is the bit that bothers me here because I don't think it's reciprocal. This is not what we're talking about. This is fantasy. We're not interacting with a computer. We're interacting with each other through a computer. If we allow ourselves to think that we're interacting with a computer, we end up having interfaces like this, I won't name names, but this is QuickBooks. And I made the mistake of typing in the wrong password. And this is how it spoke to me, right? Because the computer is speaking back to me. I did the same thing at FreshBooks, and this is what happened. Someone told me, a person, I can tell by the language, sorry, your username or password is incorrect. Please try again. It's very nice. This is human-to-human interaction. So that's what I'm talking about. Okay, off the soapbox. I want to talk about the human-to-human interaction behind any website. So here I am buying a camera bag, that one, at a business, the bricks and mortar level. So we're talking about that kind of interaction between the customer and the business, or the owner, but it's digital, okay? So just map it through. So here I go look at their website first and think, okay, what have they got? Have they got what I want? And this is like walking into the store and seeing all the stuff. Great. Then I kind of narrow it down to, I'm looking for a bag. This is like going to that corner of the store and looking at their bags. And then I've made a decision. I'm very interested in this. I want to get the details. Will my camera fit? And so on. Yes. And it's very much like going to the counter and talking to the salesperson there. And then I make a buying decision. So it's very obvious that the website, in this instance, is very similar to the actual real-life experience. So it's kind of a proxy. And that's the basis of the kind of interaction that we're getting at here. I like to think of it as being a value-oriented sort of prospect that's going on here. So we both want value, we as customers and the business owners as well. The site visitors, the site owners. What does value mean? It can mean different things. At the same time, it can mean different things to different people. So from my perspective, as a customer, I like that store because it's got cool equipment and stuff. I just like walking in there. The business owner likes me in there because when I buy things, I get money, right? So it's an exchange of value. Same thing for a college. Recently did this for a college usability study where the value for the student is an education, potential education. So they're looking at the website with that in mind. That's their mindset. Am I going to get the education and the career and the life that I want if I go here? That has to come across on the website. And from the college's point of view, the registrar, for example, are we getting enough people registering at our college? Because that's our money. That's the value for them. So, from a naive, idealistic point of view, I want to think about what that process should be for a client, from a client's point of view, for growing a website. Use that word on purpose. So, we start with an idea. Let's say we want to do a website for selling cameras and equipment and so on. A cool place. So we have an idea. We know audio-visual, so let's sell stuff to audio-visual producers. Great, that's a good idea. It's a business intent. What can we sell? Well, we think about it a little bit, and it doesn't take long, but we can think of all kinds of things to sell. And then we start to articulate that. And this could be the process of working with your website builder. Or put it from the other point of view, you are the website builder and you're talking to your client, and this is the conversation you have in the early days. What do you want to do with the site? Who are you trying to reach? That's really what this question's about. And we start to articulate it further and further, and this is very much, I suppose we could say it's compatible with Agile. It's an iterative thing. We get down into it. And it's natural. And ultimately, it becomes highly articulated because we've gone into all the details and sub-details. That's great. And then we put all the finishing touches on the content, and the site is looking very good, and we're ready to launch. These are apples, by the way. I threw those in afterwards. Little red spheres representing apples, the fruit of the whole project. Great, that's ideal. But what do we really do with Drupal? Well, after we install, this is what we see. It's a bit daunting for some people, and where do we go from here? That's the question. I added that little note because there are some clues. But where we might naively want to go is, well, I need a menu to hang everything off. So we go and try and make a menu. Let's add something. We found the admin UI for adding menus. So one of our segments was pro photography. Great. And we're going to put that in a path called Pro Center. I took that right off that other website, by the way. That was the path. Great. Save. Oh.
That's right.
What's that?
Yeah, we know this. I mean, I know it's it.
I feel your pain. So that's it. Door shut. You're not going to go that route. So back to our list. What are we going to do? Well, let's start at number 1. We've built a node, and we're going to push it back to the menu somewhere. Or we're going to give it an alias. It's still pushing it back. The information architecture is a byproduct of creating nodes, creating content. That's what nodes are for, is content, right? So we were busy thinking about articulating the site and how the site should be shaped, how all the pages should be shaped. But suddenly, we're hyper jumped and dropped into a content scenario. We need the content. But the content's never there. The content is always the last thing to come in, right? Yeah, okay, good. So that's a problem. So we could try this. We build a view. I don't think this is actually making it simpler, but we build a view. And we make it a view page. We push that back out as well. It's the same thing. The information architecture is still a byproduct because that path came after whatever that view is all about, whatever that view is actually retrieving from the database, which is deemed to exist. Or we're developers and we say, I'm just going to hook menu this. And you can start to articulate very well all of these various paths. And if you think about it, I don't know if you ever looked at it, but the Drupal core ships with about 225 paths that start with admin. It's very articulated. It's got a couple for nodes. It's got one for blog, a few for blog. There's only 300, but the majority is admin. So clearly that's what the preference or the priority or the concern was for the people that built Drupal, us, was just make sure you got the admin interface in there, right? The rest of it, the front-facing stuff, is really down to 1 or 2 paths, node. Go from there, guys, site builders. Good luck. So, and then Earl came along and tried to rescue us with PALs and Page Manager. Earl himself says the problem with Drupal is it's a push model, and he came up with PALs and Page Manager because it's a pull model. And so there are ways to articulate paths right here, special paths. And I think that's great. It's getting warmer because you can potentially articulate information architecture here. But I think there's problems underneath it that, from my point of view, still limit what you can do with this. And according to our survey, it's a really mixed blessing. It's a love-hate kind of thing. Some people love panels, some people hate panels, period. And one of the comments was, it's just too much overhead. That's one of the concerns from one developer we had. So back to this. So we have our initial empty front page, and we can assign a node, assuming the node exists and we had some content for that node. We could push that up to the front page. And Keara said, that's the first thing I like to get rid of, that emptiness at the front. Me too. It's just bothersome to see that, there saying, oh, you haven't done this yet. So again, but it still assumes that you can, that there is some node, some URL that actually is valid, that you can actually push to the front. So we haven't really gone very far. But I do think that there's a clue here. I said that before, I'll say it again. There's a clue here. I want to come back to that later. So what happens, go through that scenario again. We're talking with our clients, and they've got this great idea. We're going to do a website for camera people. Great, let's sell stuff to AV producers. What can we sell? And there's all our segments and market segments. And we start to articulate it. And then we are asked for content. And it's like hanging apples in space because nothing is there to catch them. We have to start thinking at a whole different level because that's what Drupal wants you to do. Start thinking about the apples now. Forget about the branches. And so what happens is we have to push these apples back to the trunk through these branches, through whatever it is that we're hooking up down in the bowels until we've got a website. And it's a whole different process from that path we were following with the client. We left. We went down here to start building apples and pushing them back up to where they are. So it's a disconnect. And I think this is one of the reasons. But I just want to explore that a little bit. This is the one, main thing that gets front content out there that's defined with a hook menu in the node module. And Pals uses it. You can do a lot of things with variants under there. And the whole assumption behind that is that the node brings in a context. But the node is really just a box. The number 26 tells me nothing about what's in that box. Node /123 tells me nothing about what's on that web page. There's no semantics there. We get around it with aliases, I suppose, but fundamentally, this is much more revealing. These 3 boxes, not just one, this is a hypothetical situation, but I'm going with it. Exams, history, 2012. I think we all know what's in those boxes just by that system of notation. But why can't we really think like that? I mean, fundamentally, why can't we build a site like that? Because Drupal has a very deep assumption, there's a lot of stuff built on this, that a web page is a decorated node. And that's why it gets away with node /123. Node % node. James Stone said in our LinkedIn conversation, I like this because he really puts his finger on it. He doesn't think in terms of pages. He thinks in terms of displays of content. That's natural. I think that's sensible. And there's a lot of change going on around definition of page. We've talked about that at other times, and that's a very important time to reconsider all of that right now. So a couple of Drupal camps ago, I kind of coined this phrase, a web page is a unit of business intent. So we talked about business intent. What are we trying to do here? What does this site exist for? And a web page with its URL represents a segment of that, a segment of what you're trying to do, what your client is trying to get at. An area, specific area where specific kinds of interaction can happen between them and the customers through the mechanism of the web. So all that stuff gets me thinking about information architecture spaces. I want to explore that a little bit. We can think in terms of spaces. Everybody knows how to read one of these. This is the house that you want. This is what your architect or builder will provide you with, and you say, no, I want that bigger, I want that smaller. And we often use the metaphor, the analogy of house building to clients who don't seem to get that you can't change everything, a week before launch. That we have to say, if you ask for 2 bathrooms, you get 2 bathrooms. You cannot just have 3 because we'd have to knock down all these walls, put the plumbing, et cetera, et cetera. So the house analogy is really good. It also works because you can look at it in terms of spaces. So this is the process that we have in Drupal right now. The default process that we were just referring to in terms of spaces is you start with the content and you build the space around it. You start with a node and you build a usage context around that. And that's information architecture. Kind of opposite to the way you'd actually try to build a house. I don't think anyone would try to sell you on a house by saying, pick out your furniture and we'll build around that. So all that leads me to think about what I call an inductive pull model. So pull model, yes. Inductive, let me explain. Inductive, it's a way of getting things moving. So this is an induction motor, rotary linear induction motor. It has to do with clever ways of shifting voltages in a spatial thing, and things turn and move. It's great. This is an example. This induced cleaver into action. Get rid of this damn thing. Right? This is nothing here yet. Right? And what's interesting about this is that not 1, not 2, but 3 inducers to produce content nodes, apples, couches, first. I will point out that I believe that that's the case because in Drupal 6, I think it was, there was the first really big usability test that took place at the University of Minnesota, where a lot of us had our eyes opened as to how poorly Drupal was doing on the usability side. And there was a classic video of someone who was asked to create content, create a web page, or I think just create content. And here was the navigation menu, and up there it said create content, right? And there's like these heat maps, you know, the trails of their usage, and it was like, it went on, and people were just in horror. How can that be? It says create content, and no one saw it. So they fixed that 1, 2, 3 times right after installation. So it works in theory, but in practice, we still have that problem with building around couches. So let's look at it the other way around. What if we built the spaces before we bring in the furniture? This is how I would see it happening. Well, we do it through requests. First of all, we say, okay, in this space, I'm going to request some stuff. And you keep adding. You want to have the central feature, and you add all the details. All the decoration comes after the space is built. That seems very natural. That's the way the world really works. By the way, I did that diagram before I realized I'd done my own living room. So I want to just switch analogies a little bit, because the word I used there was requests. And there's another place where we use that quite often. And I'm wondering if this is conscious or not, but a restaurant, we go in and we start making requests from servers. Where have we heard that before? And that's a great analogy, I think, because really everything about the restaurant is built to provide some kind of content, the content for consumption by the patrons. Yeah, it sounds right to me. But the magic restaurant, the reason why I'm calling it magic is because it actually doesn't exist yet. This is the same restaurant, but in production mode. So we're actually in magic mode, and the menus are empty. So now, as you speak with your client, you have a conversation with them around, well, what do you want on your menu? And it launches this process. So this is your client's future website. It's not about consuming, it's about producing the website. So think about that. The restaurant that you go to is about consumption. The restaurant that you haven't built yet, it's about production. Same with websites. So they say, I want to serve these guys. These are my different market segments. So the same thinking, apply it to a restaurant creation, apply it to production mode of a website. And I'm just going to speculate a little bit about what that might look like. What if Drupal didn't argue if you tried to create a menu? What if you just somehow added them in? There's another one, there's another one. Directly from the client's mouth, as it were. And you just sort of built these empty menus that link to empty pages. Now, I don't want to get too much into the discussion about layouts. That's a whole other discussion, so I'm not going to touch that one. Let's assume there's some layout stuff in there. And you got some visual representation of space. And then you click to edit, and you go into one particular empty page, one empty web page, and you start requesting things. So you start adding things in using some kind of a toolbar up there. And I've got just a few simple ones: menu item, static item, dynamic item, very high level. And what you're doing is you're dropping some kind of object into here as you work with the client. And you say, these are all the things that you want. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. And I stole this from that camera website, by the way. This is what they've got on that homepage. These actually correspond to empty blocks. You don't really need a block to do something. You can have a block that's empty. It needs an internal name. It needs a human name. It needs probably some kind of description. Why is it there? That's all we've got here. That's what we've captured. So this is what I think is interesting, is that these now are still requests, but they're not requests to the server because we're not consuming, we're producing. They're requests to the site builder. Site builder, could you give me one of these? Put these on this page. So they become a to-do list for the site builder. So static blocks basically could resolve to nodes, empty nodes. I need a node here. Okay. Dynamic content or dynamic blocks resolve probably to views, empty views. And then all the real configuration is done a little bit later on. But you've captured so much about what the intent of the client is. You've kind of done a whole requirement gathering process here whilst building the kind of the outer layer, the outer top level of the actual website. And so I'm just speculating a bit more that this is how it might impact a UI, the real UI. This is Vue's UI as it is. And under this inductive pull model, maybe you can recycle, or not recycle, you could repurpose things to handle emptinesses. So we know we need empty blocks here, and this is what they're supposed to be doing. So when I come here as a site builder, these are basically saying, oh, Michael, build me one of these, build me one of these, and so on. And that somehow all translates ultimately when you go back to the page. Oh, now there's real things because we did the configuration. So it's a reminder list, but it's integrated completely with the actual mechanism of site building. So those are how those other requirements from the discussion with the client can map, I think, directly into the UI. So I think that was my last slide. It seems to have stopped. So anyway, I just want to say thank you to everybody who did participate on the LinkedIn discussion. That was really marvelous that people chipped in. I also want to say thank you to these guys, John, who's been great at giving me feedback on this stuff, often late at night. Thomas, who I've talked to a lot, Thomas Svensson, about site builder things. So he's given me a lot of information about what it's like for him as a site builder and his user experience. And my partner, Conchita, who is endlessly patient. I just want to say thank you to them. So anyway, that's what I'm presenting, that premise, that hypothesis. I'd really love to hear what you guys think. This, I think, is potentially something that could go on. I also was going to say that from what I understand of Drupal 8, it's actually quite compatible. The entire Whiskey initiative, the entire request base of building web pages through Drupal 8 seems to be very compatible with this stuff, as does the Blocks API, I think. I started looking at that. So anyway, I would just want to throw that out and see, am I mad? Or is there something here?
Yes.
Thanks, Henrik.
Yes, what?
He's mad.
Yes, Henrik.
As usual, it's always thought-provoking and challenging to hear you here. I have so many questions. One is, have you thought about how what you're talking about relates to the whole story scenario, Gherkin thing that's talked recently?
So have I thought about the user story scenario and the behavior-driven stuff?
Talking about here in terms of pulling, what the user wants from this.
I think we're talking about the same thing, but and I was thinking about it during Dave's talk last hour, because it's so close. I mean, it's really similar, right? But I'm thinking that maybe it's orthogonal. Maybe it's just a different dimension, because obviously there's got, Agile allows iterations to happen, allows that articulation to happen, hopefully, in some fashion. But I still think, and I was trying to guess at this during Dave's talk, that maybe what we're talking about, even within one sprint, we still end up getting pulled into the weeds because of the very mechanisms that we're forced to use. And so we treat them as different processes. David had talked about, the people that design information architecture as being a particular, point of view, and it's a really important one. But does it translate into reality? That's a question. He also mentioned the product owner. Should they be on the technical side? Should they be on the client side? That's what that conversation is about, I think. So I think there's a lot of harmony there. That's as much as I can answer it for now. But I have great amounts of optimism that there's something that could really benefit and help the whole agile user stories and so on get amplified.
That's my sense too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dave?
Like even in Drupal 7, this concept seems pretty compatible with Analyzer. But it occurs to me that like what you're basically talking about, there's currently a trend around what we'll call design in browser, where we'll move the design process into the actual HTML and CSS as early as possible. It seems to be what you're talking about here is kind of like information architecture in browser, where rather than
Yeah, I think I am.
information architects creating like sitemaps and wireframes, we move that processing.
Yeah, and I think I am too. I think that's a good way to put it. And I think what I'm doing too, it's kind of like, what's the efficiency of the engine? If you have a leaky gasket, you're not getting good mileage, right? And it's polluting and so on. And what's the efficiency of having abstractions, sitemaps, and so on done by experts in that area, and then translate that into implementation, compared to what if they just did it right in the actual site? But the trick though is that there's no damage, that there's no negative consequences. And right now, if you did that right now, well, you can't, but right off the bat, the menu manager won't let you.
I was just thinking of Open Atrium 2 and the way that whole thing just folds out from basically, it appears like you're building a menu and you build literally spaces, subspaces, and you have a whole menu structure and there's nothing really there except sort of a list of things that might be new. But you could also just add blocks to that page.
Yeah.
You can just put something and you can put just text in them essentially. You can type and say this is going to be blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It doesn't go all the way through to what you're describing, but it's a very specific.
Yeah, and so that's great. Thanks for that example. More proof, as far as I'm concerned, right, that the concept has some benefit, but it's incomplete. It doesn't go all the way. But I do like the idea that you can actually harness intent. You can harness the energy behind a client saying, oh, this is what I want to do here, and this is what I want to do there, and you capture that, and it's there, it's in the system, because what is it we as developers don't want to do in the end, when we're creating views and blocks and so on? It's like fill in the description, right? I don't know. You put some kind of placeholder in there. Well, it's already waiting to happen. That's your conversation with the client, so why not bring that in and drive the process from the other end? So that's really what it is. So that's a good example. Thanks.
You really hit the nail on the head with how backwards site building is. And I'd love to see your next iteration of this, where you actually get out to the fruit on the tree and explore how we can handle basically a Jolly Rancher tree, which has apples and oranges and pears, which might be like different content types. We all
Yes.
have individual needs for different fields, because that's another
Yeah.
a whole other ball or a whole other basket of fruit.
Yeah.
But in the same way, we want to look at the information architecture as a page structure. Chair's missing here. The same challenges apply to the content types themselves for the different at the field level.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, so there are many more levels that this could be applied to theoretically. So yeah, next iteration would be interesting. If you know of any ways to fund such a thing, that would be great. Because this is all personal research, right? So I can only go so, maybe that's why it's such a slow conversation, right? But I'm thinking that maybe, and I kind of want to test the waters here, if I was to try and do an Indiegogo or something like that, crowdsourcing, do you think people might get behind this thing so we could actually get something done? I would like to believe so, but if you have any opinions on that, I'd love to hear it. And I don't mind making a video to sell the story, because I think that does make Indiegogo go. But I think, just looking at certain things, like for example, some of the, I think, disciplined approaches that are in the architecture, for Drupal 8, the plugin API and so on. I think once you nail something like that, clearly it can get applied everywhere. Blocks are fieldable, because Drupal 7, introduced fields, brought into the core. It's amazing. If you hit a nub like that, the benefits just keep unfolding. I'm hoping that the concept of, in C you'd call it a null pointer perhaps, but the concept of emptiness, empty spaces, empty blocks, empty objects, is actually very powerful. And so far, I think we generally reject it. We don't, ooh, can't touch that, it's empty, right? I think we should embrace them. And hopefully that could be as powerful as something like a plugin API. And we can then go after the races. Because, of course, what we want to do ultimately is beat WordPress, right? I forgot to mention that. I just said that. By the way, I also am interested in looking at WordPress because I find it an interesting kind of creature. Because it's got so much of its kind of database accessing from the theme and so on. I find that bizarre. I recently did a WordPress plugin for a client, partly because I was morbidly curious to see what it was like. It worked, but I still have some scars. I mean, it's a weird experience. And yet, 50% of the websites on the planet are WordPress. So as a Drupal person, that's unacceptable. And if they have a somehow better user experience, I would like to raise the ante and have a much better experience that clients, site builders, everybody else can recognize and roll with. Henry?
Michael, is it fair to describe what you're talking about as a rapid prototyping tool based on an empty content block?
That kind of occurred to me as well. It is very prototypey, I think.
Is that
Yes.
fair?
Yeah. Yes. But often we say we throw away our prototypes, right? Because
Well, and that would be a big difference here. 'Cause
Yeah,
you're
we get to
actually
keep it.
building the real thing iteratively.
You'd have to have an accepted way of doing something. There's so many different ways of doing and accomplishing a given task. If the prototype would automatically create build orders and views for some things and blocks for other things and just straight nodes for another thing, you kind of have to abstract that out, in the tool beforehand to figure all that out, or else you'll have to make that decision kind of after you structure. Okay, this is how I want it structured. Then I'm still going to have to add information as to I think this should be a view, or I think this should be.
Yeah. So I think the trick is, you're right, there has to be some serious analysis in the first place as a system design. And the trick is to be able to get flexibility without chaos and structure without too many limits. That's always the problem, isn't it? But I think it can be done. I have faith. An analogy, I used to work at Corel a long time ago, and I worked on CorelDRAW. And one of the features I did for CorelDRAW 5, I think it was, or 4, power lines, which are variable width lines that could be dynamically edited. Unlike the competition, their variable width lines were like blobs, and they were dead objects. With this, it was basically done by mapping what effectively a stereo signal onto the base vector path. Right? Worked wonderfully. I had to make decisions about, well, what kind of practical system could we use to make this really usable for people without doing a lot of programmatic-like things, right? And I looked at things like Dr. Seuss books and cartoons and Rembrandt drawings, for that matter. And I kind of came up with a set of kind of meta lines that, from the point of view of width, variable width. I can't remember what the names I gave them were, but it ultimately translated into a bunch of presets. So if you think of it kind of in binary terms, it's like 0, 1, 0. That was kind of one of these shapes, right? 1, 0, a wedge shape. 0, 1, wedge shape. 1, 0, 1. It just got down to things like that, right? As out-of-the-box presets and with understandable names and illustrations. And then there was things like, oh, how do you get from 1 to 0? Well, straight line or through a curve, right? Or is the curve like this, or is it like this? So it got down to a few sets of variables. So I had about 12 presets, and you could do a lot with it. And I know, for example, the cartoonist for a Toronto newspaper used that to actually do his work. So I know it actually translated into real-life purpose. So my feeling is that with that kind of analysis that you mentioned, Sean, we could probably come up with a good tool set to get the process underway. I put 3 nominal tools up there, menu, static, and dynamic. But I think it requires more analysis, more thought, and more proofing. But I do believe it could be done.
Or would it also help tying into a really good prototyping tool that can make a functional, working, clickable system, but then almost spit out a Drupal build order at the end and saying, this is the end result, this is what this prototyping needs to, this is what needs to be built. I'm not saying it's going to spit out a Drupal site, but no, it would spit out
A requirements list of some kind, yeah. A requirements list with some salvageable data, perhaps. I think that could work in principle as well. I missed the Merlin talk. I heard the name around, but I unfortunately missed it. And Heinrich's doing a talk tomorrow that you should go to if you're interested in this on behavior-driven development, because I think there's,
I think they probably are.
synchronicity there.
When I think about it, I think they probably are orthogonal, what you're talking about and what I'm talking about, but work together.
Work together, yeah,
Very
yeah.
good stuff.
Well, if you look at an obvious analogy, right, if you want to build a bridge across something, you have to have the flat bit that you drive on, you have to have these bits to stop it from collapsing. So it might be something like that. So, anyway, I think I haven't been watching the clock, but it appears to be 2:56, so I think, is there maybe one more question, or? Anyway, I really appreciate your coming and giving me a feedback. You're just encouraging me, so stop it. Thanks.